Hello, welcome to episode 8 of Sailor's Disgrace. This is the final episode of the first season. The first season really is about my story and how I got to the point I am today. So, like every episode, I'll start this one with a quote. This is from one of my all time favorite authors, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it's a simple quote, but it's self trust is the first secret of success. And getting to this point of my life, which I consider a success to get this far, and I feel like I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue furthering myself, bettering myself, and helping those around me. But that first thing that I had to do was really trust myself, really understand that what I was going through and the process I was dealing with was all for the better, was all going to help me in the long run. And I had to really trust the process. And the first thing I had to get through was the crushing fear that was overtaking my life. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of therapy. It took a lot of self-care, a lot of reflection, a lot of understanding about my life and what I had gone through, and understanding that it was okay to be afraid at times. And it was okay that I hurt for so long and that I silenced myself for so long that I couldn't function anymore. And it was okay to recognize that, to understand and put it in its proper place. It was very difficult for a long time for me, but I got through that fear. I got through the fear of being alive, of confronting my past. And I did that one of many ways. And first, I found safe people that I could talk to, people that I could actually trust. I had some very good friends that I started to open up to, a select few at first. Like I said, I think only three or four people knew what happened to me in 2016 when I came out with it. It was my sister, my best friend Bradley, whom I interviewed at that time. I think and a good friend from the Coast Guard that I trusted. And that was it at first. And I started talking to them, and it was small doses because we only saw each other so often, or it was over the phone, or life took us in other directions, so I didn't have it all the time. But every time I opened up about it, and every time I expressed it and talked about it with them, it helped. But also, I think the bigger leap for me was the therapy. And going through therapy really changed my life, and continuing with it, sticking it out. And I mentioned some of the issues of changing therapists and going through different types of therapy, but understanding that I couldn't do it alone, at least for me. I really needed the help. I really needed someone, a professional that I could share this with and gain tools and understand the process of healing. And I like to plug a few books right now. The first one that I was given here is The Courage to Heal Workbook by Laura Davis. It's geared more towards survivors of childhood sexual abuse, which did apply to me with my complex PTSD. Not that I was abused as a child, but what happened with my sister and how it affected my family. So that related directly to me. But then also, even in the military, I was only 19 or 20. I think I was 19 years old when I was raped. I was basically a child still. I was very young, so it may not have been a family member that did that to me. And a lot of the book is speaking to that and how to heal from that specifically, but it really does apply across the board to any survivor of sexual assault. And I just recently flipped through this book after years of it sitting in a dresser drawer, and I realized I never finished this book. I never actually got to the end of it. I have a bunch of notes and a bunch of my chicken scratch throughout the book, but I never finished it. And I think now, after doing this podcast and continuing this podcast, I'm going to talk more about resources in the next seasons. I'm going to finish this book. I'm going to work through the rest of this workbook. But one thing I flipped open to just recently is towards the end about resolution and moving on. It's resolution cannot be rushed. It is the natural result of moving through the stages of the healing process over and over again. Until you have met your anger, felt your pain, and experienced your vulnerability, you can't move on. If you try to do so prematurely, you will be running away, not healing. And I find that to be very true, that it is an ongoing process, that we never really completely finish what we are doing. Not just overcoming trauma, but becoming actualized and maturing as a person and understanding the human condition. It takes a lot of work. And to try to rush that process, to not really embrace it, and to not understand why you're doing these things, you're not going to succeed. You really have to take the time for self-care. And I started to do that as well. So after my cancer, when I was finally cleared after my second surgery, when I reversed my ileostomy and I was cleared by medical, I started to exercise as well. I had always somewhat exercised previously, but I was never fit. I was very skinny. I've always been very skinny, very thin, but with the drinking for years and my body, I was just out of shape, and I never really followed a workout program or did anything to really benefit myself. It was more just going through the motions and doing enough just to build up a sweat. But I joined a gym in Texas that was brand new, and it was an amazing facility, and it was expensive, but I put in that money, and that actually helped push me to go more. I set up a schedule, and they had free classes, they had yoga classes and spin classes and weight training classes and all these things I did, and it was very hard at first, not just because of the cancer and recovering from the surgeries, but my body, I was weak. I was like in the remedial gym class. I was 35 years old or 34 years old, and I was surrounded by, no fault of theirs, but geriatric people, and that's where I was physically, and it was hard, and I had to swallow my pride and do these classes, and have people look at you through the windows and things like that. But I realized it didn't matter what they thought, that I was going to make myself better, and nobody else could. And I did that with exercise as well. I started to swim, I started to cycle, I started to do yoga, I started hitting the weights some, and really just getting my body acclimated to doing that stuff. And that really put me on that self-improvement strive in my life. And I continued that. And I also started practicing more on mindfulness. I went through meditation, and I learned grounding techniques, how to deal with triggers. And triggers are very real, and they still are to me. I mentioned one before, I think during my interview with Shannon, and they still happen. And they come out of the blue sometimes, and you have to realize that sometimes things will hit you that you weren't expecting. And it's okay to identify that. You have to be able to identify what's happening to you, what you're going through, and you have to be able to ground that. You have to be able to put it in its proper place and remind yourself that you're okay, that what you're feeling is a resurgence of a trauma. And you have to ground yourself and accepting that and really putting yourself in a proper mindset. And sometimes you have to let it out too. You have to process that feeling. And sometimes it's crying. Sometimes it might just be you need a quiet space, or you just need alone time. Or maybe you need a hug from a loved one, or whatever it might be that you really need at that moment, and not being afraid to ask yourself of it or to ask someone else from it. So to say like, oh man, something just hit me. It was a news article or something. Somebody said something that just really put me in a dark spot for a minute. Can I get a hug from my wife, my kid, whatever it might be? You may not have to explain to them why, but just being comfortable asking for that, or a phone call from a loved one, or for me, a lot of times it's just meditation and grounding and breathing, and I have to take a few minutes, and sometimes it's hard to do that. I had one last year where I was in the car, I was driving, and something on the radio really triggered me, and it put me into a strange space. It was actually an interview with an ex-college football player, and he was speaking about the sexual abuse, I believe it was the University of Michigan, that he underwent and how he turned that into a positive in his life. And all the things that he went through for years. It was exactly what I went through. And I was driving my car when he said it, and I started to drift off into space. And that's not safe. I had to ground myself really fast and continue driving. Luckily, I was close to home, and I got home and I processed that. And I owe that experience right there to creating this podcast. I heard what he was saying, and I'll put a link to it. And at the moment, I can't remember his name, but I'll find it and I'll put a link to it. But everything he said, it was like he was speaking directly to me on that radio interview. And it was a call to action for me. It gave me the idea for this podcast. And I always thought about what I was told during the initial stages of my therapy about someday I can turn this all into a positive. And I thought that was crazy. And it took about 6 years later when there it was. There was my answer. And it resonated with me. But I had to do it safely. I had to get my car parked, and then I had to breathe. I remember sitting in my driveway and just breathing it all out and thinking about it and processing everything that he was saying during that interview. And it turned out to be true. It turned out to help me, and it helped me conquer even more of my fear, which I thought I was over, but like I said, it's an ongoing process. It never ends. And accepting that part of it too, that you're never going to be fully over anything. There are going to be times that things scare you. There's going to be times that you doubt yourself. There's going to be confrontations. There's going to be challenges in your life or in a loved one's life where you may have to deal with a similar situation. But you're now armed with all these tools to help yourself and help others. And that's the real goal, I think, is to be able to take tragedy and turn it into promise, turn it into a positive thing. And that's all I've wanted to do now. And going back to therapies, I mentioned previously my group therapy, that also helped a lot. And this book that we used in the group therapy, I'm going to hold it up here and I'll put the links to it. It's the Complex PTSD Workbook by Ariel Schwartz, Dr. Schwartz. And this is the book that we used in group therapy, and I believe it was twice a week at first we went through, and we actually talked through each of the chapters, worked through them, talk about them, discuss them. It took a few weeks till we started talking out loud, and we went through the book twice. So we worked through it individually, and then we really opened up about our first entries and started discussing complex PTSD and how it affects us in our relationships and how we handle our lives. And that book really helped me through some of the scariest parts of my trauma journey, I guess you can call it, and my self-discovery. So with all that being said, self-trust is the first secret of success, right? And that's what this whole podcast is about. It's trusting yourself to heal. It's trusting yourself to not blame yourself for things that have happened to you. And even to take ownership of the mistakes you've made in your life, the poor choices, but also understanding that you can correct a lot of those things, that you can work through and make better decisions for yourself and for others. Not taking toxic relationships at face value and just accepting them as part of your life. That was part of my problem too. I don't want to speak ill of family members or my ex-wife. They're good people. But I maintained those relationships because I felt I had to. I felt I did not have a voice. And I was stuck where I was. I was stuck being miserable. I was stuck fighting myself every single day and fighting those people. And nobody was happy, And it eventually helped lead to my divorce from my first wife. And I was finally able to be happy with myself and protect my son. Again, I won't go into the details of that. It's neither a time nor a place, but I was able to really take care of what was important in my life and really care for my son by not allowing toxicity in my life, by saying no more. These things aren't helping anybody. It's time to make changes. And I did that. And sometimes it was painful, but I opened myself up. I really started to follow self-care and therapy, exercise, and mindfulness and empathy, and really focused on that in my life. And what's funny is when I did that, my world opened up completely. And now that I live in Florida, I'm actually moving pretty soon, but after I got here, it was shortly after the divorce and everything that I met my current wife. And I was not planning on getting married or being in any kind of serious relationship with anybody. But she responded to me and how I was, I think. Like, I was ready for that kind of relationship with someone. I was ready. I was so open and happy with myself that I attracted someone fantastic, and everything fell into place. We married last year. I now have a wonderful stepson as well, and my family grew, and life is changing for all of us. And there's been challenges, of course, there, but I'm able to handle those challenges, and I'm able to work through those challenges and understand that it's all part of growth. It's all part of life, and not to be so traumatized by events that happen in my life. And I've had some stuff happen, and even in the past couple of years, and it's okay. I understand that we can't blame ourselves for everything. We can't hold on to trauma, and we can't let it ruin our lives. We learn from those things. We take that bad thing and turn it into something good, something positive. And it's hard, and it's never an immediate thing. It's not like hurry up and get over it, but how to properly put it in its place and how to feel that you can handle these things now. It's awe-inspiring. I really do feel that I'm at a place in my life where I can finally grow and really grow. And I have plans for the future that I've never had before. I have things that I want to do now, and I'm not afraid to do anything anymore. I travel more. I, I spend more time with my kids, and I spend more time with my wife, and I really put focus on positive relationships in my life, and also through helping people. And before, I had no real plan after the Coast Guard. I was just gonna go as long as I could, and then maybe get a civilian job in the same field and just live my life and do that. But now I want to do positive things. I'm actually thinking of pursuing a career after the Coast Guard because I want to help people. Maybe be a public defender, or I don't know exactly. But I do think about going to law school, and I wouldn't have thought of that 5 years ago, or 2016 or prior. I never even thought of that. And now it's a very real possibility for me, and I've been taking the steps to make that happen. And is it overwhelming sometimes? Sure, but I've learned to take those challenges. I've learned to take big things and break them up into smaller pieces, and to focus one at a time and take each step instead of trying to rush through things or ignore certain things and have it catch up on you later. It's the same thing with healing from trauma as it is for planning a career. You have to take these things one thing at a time. And I fully grasp all that now. And I say all this stuff, and I feel like I'm just talking about how to work through trauma and how to understand trauma. But it all comes to just being a decent human being, and to not feel guilt or blame or shame for anything that you have gone through in your life. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that I was 19 years old and very gullible and vulnerable and drank with the wrong people and was assaulted. That's okay. It's horrible, and I wish it never happened. Of course, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it did happen, and it's not my fault. It's not my fault at all. It's those people that did it to me, the ones that took advantage of a young kid and that were ready to do that and probably did it to other people, and they had a whole system down, and it's their fault. They're the problem, not me. And putting that in its place and turning all of that horrible horrible action into a positive reaction, I think is what therapy is all about. It's what processing trauma, and it's about living, you know. And that's what this is about. That's what this podcast is about. That's what this community is about. I hope my story will help at least one person. And if it doesn't, it's helped me. But I really do hope that there are people out there that need to hear this or want to hear this and can gain something from it. I really hope that is the case. And I thank you all so much for listening to me, for all the feedback, all the comments I'm receiving. And I've had people reach out from years ago, and I'm so grateful for that. And I appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to the next season. I'm looking forward to discussing cases and digging more into resources, books, and different types of therapy. I'm really going to hone in on that kind of stuff in the next season. So I'm going to take a little break, I think, because, like I said, I'm moving soon, and I have a lot of things on my plate. And I'll still post things online, but I may take a pause from actually making episodes like this just for a little while, but it will come back. And I've already put out some feelers to try to get more interviews with people. I've reached out to quite a few and getting some responses, so I'll schedule those out as well. So again, if you guys have any ideas or comments or any ideas on the podcast or the community as a whole, I'm all ears, and I really mean that. This is a communal effort. I really want to have this driven by the group, not just me talking. I enjoy talking, and I'm enjoying sharing my story, but I really want to turn this into an outward focus now. This was inward. This was me processing my story and sharing it with folks, hoping that they can learn something from what I went through. And now let's talk about moving forward. And if there's anybody that wants to share their story as well, and is comfortable doing that, either anonymously or on an interview or however, I'd like to share that as well if anybody's comfortable with that. So again, thanks everyone. Thank you so much. This has been a real great experience for me, and I'm really appreciative of all of you. And yeah, that's it. So real quick plug again for David Brown for providing the theme music from Wayward Blues. Check him out on Spotify, and he also has his own website in the links. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. I really hope everyone is enjoying their summer, and can't wait to hear from you all soon. Y'all, you take care of yourselves, okay? Bye.
Woke up this morning with a fog around my head. Oh, I looked for you beside me, but I was all alone in my bed. Hey, I've been down since I was born. Think I'll